All right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do part two of the World War II timeline. All right, and this is going to stretch from 1942 until the beginning. We're going to do two events or two slides in 1944. That way we can even them out. All right, and so we're going to start with 1942. All right, so last thing we saw on our last one on part one, let me see if I can backtrack here a little bit, is we saw the attack on Pearl Harbor, going to bring the United States into the war, and then Germany and Italy, when the U.S. declares war on Japan, Germany and Italy are going to declare war on the United States. All right, so now let's talk about what happens in 1942. And in 1942, the war is still really going bad for the Allies. So that's Great Britain, France, United States are the big allies. War is going really bad. All right. And so the Japanese basically are there's nobody to stop them. They're just doing whatever they want over in Asia. So they take the island nation of the Philippines, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Burma, Singapore, and Guadalcanal. These are all little small island nations. And the Japanese are very brutal when they take over. They kill tons of civilians and innocent people and brutalize them. All right, they're really brutal. All right, and so when they took over the Philippines, what happened? The United States, we had a naval base in the Philippines, and so we had a pretty strong military presence, but we weren't in position. We hardly had any ships there to defend ourselves. And so when the Japanese came into the Philippines, we pretty much had to flee the island. Well, in the process of fleeing, we left a bunch. I don't know the exact number. I want to say in the neighborhood of 20,000 guys stranded in the Philippines. All right, and a lot of them are going to run up into the mountains and hide, but a lot of them get captured. And the ones that get captured, the Japanese march them all the way across one of the islands of the Philippines, one of the big islands. And this was known as a forced march. And if you fell off or got sick and you couldn't walk anymore, they'd throw you on the side of the road, and then the next guard that would come by would just shoot you. All right, so it was brutal. It was a brutal thing. It's known as the Bataan Death March. All right, now the leader of the military base of our naval base in the Philippines was a guy named Douglas MacArthur. And when he had to flee the island, he and a lot of the other people had to flee the island, he was angry. And as he was walking on the ship to leave the island, he made the promise, I shall return. And later on in the war, he's going to return and take the island back over again. We just weren't in a position to stop the Japanese at that point. Our military wasn't built up yet, because you got to understand, this is early 1942. Well, the night up until December 7th, 1941, we weren't at war, so we weren't ready for the war. We mistakenly didn't do enough to get ready. All right, so that takes us to our next slide. All right, now the next slide. So what also happens in early 1942 is Hitler wants to pick up the pace on killing the Jews. So he holds a meeting, and this meeting was in a suburb of Berlin called Wannsee. All right, and it's a really nice area. All right, so the meeting was called the Wannsee Conference, and at this conference they planned out the whole Holocaust, how to kill all of the Jews in all of Europe. That was their goal. And so the code word for the Holocaust was called the Final Solution. All right, and there's a movie, and it's on. I think it's on Netflix or it's on Amazon Prime, one of the two. It's called The Conspiracy. And if you watch that, it basically shows the whole Wannsee conference, the meeting. And they talk about, I mean, it's troubling when they talk about the Jews and just how matter of fact they are about killing all the Jews. It's horrific to watch, really. But anyway, it's called conspiracy. I've shown it in class before. Now, what's going to happen? So by spring of 1942, we start sending our troops over to Great Britain. So Great Britain's going to be our staging area for where we're going to send them to fight against the Nazis, right? Because it's a lot easier for them to leave Great Britain and get to someplace in Europe than it is to leave the United States and get there. So we start sending our troops en masse over to Great Britain. Now, at the same time, our government secretly puts together a group of scientists and the smartest people in the United States, and they send them all out to New Mexico, and they start working on building the atomic bomb. And this the code word for this is the Manhattan Project. All right, and they start working on how to build the atomic bomb. All right, and they do it out in Mexico. Now, another thing that happens is right after Pearl Harbor, our president and the military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, got together and they said, you know what, we need to strike back at Japan right away. We need to at least hit them. And so they came up with an idea on how to weld these extra gas tanks on some of our bombers. And then they took these bombers and they took them in aircraft carriers way out in the middle of the Pacific and launched them. And they would fly, drop their bombs on Tokyo, and then fly on over from past Tokyo over China, and they would crash land their planes. So when they ran out of gas, they would parachute out, and hopefully the Chinese would find them instead of the Japanese that were there. All right, and some of the guys, they were called Doolittle's Raiders because Jimmy Doolittle was the Army Air Corps guy that came up with the idea on how to to do this, to attack Tokyo. And so they flew like 57 missions where they dropped bombs on Tokyo just so they could strike back at the Japanese kind of in retaliation for what they did at Pearl Harbor. All right, and they were known as Doolittle's Raiders. And basically it was kind of a suicide mission because once they dropped the bombs, they had to go parachute out of their planes in China and hope that they didn't get captured by the Japanese. All right, the next slide, 1942. All right, the Battle of Coral Sea is this big battle. So the Coral Sea, and I wish I had my map. You know, if we were in class, I'd have my map up behind me and I could show you. But the Coral Sea is, if you look at the country of Australia, and just to the east of Australia is the Coral Sea. And so what happened is the Japanese Navy was heading down because now their next big thing they wanted to take over was Australia. So that was going to be their version of living space, is to take Australia over and have Australia be, a Japanese living space. Well, our Navy met them at Coral Sea, and we defeated the Japanese Navy at the Battle of Coral Sea and turned them back. And essentially it saved Australia. So the whole rest of the war, anytime our Navy ships would stop in Australia for rest and relaxation so the guys could get a little break from the war, the Australian people would come to the port cities and they would pick up the Navy guys and the soldiers that were coming there for R&R and take them back to their houses and feed them and just let them chill out and rest. Because they were so grateful that we rescued them from Japanese destruction at the Battle of Coral Sea. All right, now next, the U.S. Navy. This is probably the most decisive battle, is the Battle of Midway. And it's called Midway Island because it's right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's about halfway between California and Japan. And so what happened was, the Battle of Midway, we kind of suckered the Japanese into attacking them. We basically sent out a bunch of fake messages and the Japanese thought that there were all kinds of technical problems at Midway, and it would be a good time to attack Midway. Well, when the Japanese brought their aircraft carriers to get them close enough so that their planes could attack Midway, we were waiting, and we ended up sinking a bunch of their aircraft carriers during this battle. And it damaged the Japanese Navy so bad that they never would recover. So if you look, up until the Battle of Midway, almost every battle had been won by the Axis, by Great Britain, or I mean, by Germany or Italy or Japan. And after Midway, all of a sudden the tide's going to turn, and the Allies are going to start winning some of these battles. All right. And so this is kind of a big time turning point, you know, so you can see the war starts turning in the favor of the Allies. Now, the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to go down to North Africa, and that's when the United States is going to show up in North Africa. And this was called Operation Torch, was the Allies kicking the Germans and Italians out of North Africa. Because what we basically had to do is go to the fringe. Where were the furthest that the Axis were extended? And their furthest they moved south was North Africa. So you got to push them out of North Africa first, and then you got to invade Europe. All right, so this was the beginning of kicking them out of North Africa. All right, now go to the next slide. All right, so the next slide, down in Egypt, right? Well, in North Africa, I'm not sure if it was in Egypt. The Battle of El Alamein was a big tank battle between the British and the German Africa Corps led by Rommel. And it was one of the first big defeats of the Germans down in North Africa. And another one was Battle of Kasserine Pass, and that's where it was in Tunisia, and that was kind of the end of the Axis. That's when they fled North Africa. Now, one of the other big things about the time all the stuff's going on in North Africa, the first death camps. And these are concentration camps that were designed just to kill. All right. And the first big one was Treblinka that opened. And again, most of these are over in Poland, kind of out in rural areas where nobody knows they're there. Okay. So the first big death camp, Treblinka, opens up, and they're going to start killing Jews en masse. They put them in boxcars and send them there. All right. And that's so that's going on. All right. Now we start moving to 1943. Okay, and so in 1943, the Allies have a big meeting. All right, and this is going to be what we call the Big Three. It's going to be Roosevelt from the United States, Winston Churchill from Great Britain, and Joseph Stalin from Russia. And it's kind of funny because Great Britain and the United States really don't like Russia, but we don't like Hitler worse, so we end up teaming up with Russia. They become on our side. And so they meet in Casablanca. Now, Casablanca is a city that's in Morocco, right, in the northern part of Africa. And so they meet in Casablanca, and they basically agree that the only thing they will accept is an unconditional surrender of Germany. All right, and unconditional meaning that they're going to surrender, and then the Allies will decide what's going to happen to them, right? Because they know if they give in to Hitler at all, he'll surrender and then do a bunch of other stupid stuff. So they know Germany can't surrender with conditions. It's got to be unconditional. All right, now things start falling apart for the Axis bad. All right, and the first place that cracks is Italy, and basically Mussolini's government gets overthrown. The fascist government in Italy gets overthrown. All right, and now you've got a new government, and one of the first things that the new government does is declare war on Germany, of all things. Now, in the meantime, things start to go bad for Germany. And where they start to go bad is in Russia. Now, in the southern part of Russia, there's a big city called Stalingrad. All right, I think today it's called Petrograd. But so it was named after Stalin's named city, and so the Hitler had surrounded it, and Stalingrad had been under siege for hundreds of days. And what happened was the Stalin was able to break through and then surround the German troops and 90,000 German troops surrendered. And this was the beginning of the end for the Germans, because the German Sixth Army, and it was their, like, it would be like their best of their best, like their special forces, like their Green Berets, their Navy SEALs, the best dudes they have were in this group, and they made a couple bad decisions, and going to Stalingrad was one of them, and the whole Sixth Army got, and it killed the morale of the German people, because there were like 600,000 German troops that went in, and only less than 10,000 of them made it back out. All right, and so this is the beginning of the end for the Germans right here, Stalingrad. All right, go to the next one. All right, I like, and this slide's pretty funny. Well, I don't know if it's funny, but all right, this picture, I'll talk about it in a second. All right, so what happens is later on in the year, the big three have another meeting, and this is the Tehran Conference. So they meet in the Middle East. They meet over closer to Russia. And at the Tehran Conference, now Stalin's going to become more aggressive and really try to force his will on what the Allies want to do. All right, but basically at the Tehran Conference, Stalin, Roosevelt, Churchill get together, and they start talking about, okay, we got to go in and take France back. All right, and this, so they called the invasion the plan to take France back, that was going to be D-Day, whenever they were going to go in and get France back. So they planned that whole thing out. In the meantime, what they do is they make Dwight Eisenhower, who is the leader of the United States Army, he's the highest ranking general in the United States Army, they make him the Supreme Allied Commander. Now, prior to that, this guy over here, excuse me, this guy over here, his name's Colin Montgomery. He was the Supreme Allied Commander, but they take command away from him and give it to the or I think that Roosevelt really pushed that, that we wanted to run the show. And so Eisenhower gets made up the Supreme Allied Commander. The Germans are going to surrender in North Africa. Italy now declares war on Germany, and the Allies start to go in to Sicily to kick the Germans out of Sicily. Now, in the meantime, our guy Mussolini here, all right, gets captured by the Italian government, and he and 5 or 6 of his closest allies in Italy, they kill them all. And it's pretty crazy, because this picture, it's in a gas station, and they've got them hanging upside down, dead, and they let them stay there for days, several days, so that the people could see, look, this is what happens, and they kept him on public display, dead, hanging upside down. All right, so now the Germans are in trouble, and so the Allies in later on in 1943, start large-scale bombing of the big German cities, especially Hamburg and Dresden, because they're the furthest west, and they're the easiest to get to from Great Britain, from our air bases in Great Britain. So we'd have planes leave every night, fly from Great Britain over Germany, bomb their big cities, bomb their factories. We were going after their factories and their economic systems more than anything. Now, we also start making some headway out in the Pacific against the Japanese. We capture a really important tactical island called Guadalcanal in the Pacific at the same time. All right, now we move into 1944. And so now by 1944, the Allies pretty much know that we're going to win the war, but we just don't know, how long it's going to take. All right, and so some more German surrender at Leningrad, and the Crimean, which is in the very south. So by this point in time, Russia is completely liberated from the Germans. All right, and we keep attacking more and more of the German cities, trying to blow up their factories and their ability to create war machinery. All right, the Allies from the south come up through, and they liberate Rome, kick the Germans out of Rome, take Rome back from the Germans. But the Germans pull a new weapon out of their hat, and this is the beginning of rocket technology. jet and rocket technology. All right, and they started making these V1 and V2 flying bombs, and they weren't real accurate, but they could make it from Germany all the way to Great Britain and blow things up. All right, so the Germans aren't quitting yet. All right, now next comes D-Day. All right, and D-Day is going to happen on June 6th. I think it was supposed to happen a couple days before this, but there was a bad storm that came in that made the water so rough that they had to delay it. And then finally on June 6th, they got the weather they wanted. Now the invasion, the code word for attacking or invading northern France was Operation Overlord. Now, one of the things that the United States and Britain did is they kind of baited the Germans. So, like, if you look at this is, if you look at this map, this is the map of southern England, and here's the map of northern France, and this is the English Channel. Well, if you could go way over here to the right off the screen here a little bit, the United States, we put our #1 general, all right, over here and put a bunch of troops over here. And then we built a bunch of fake troops, like silhouettes of people that were out, so that the German spy planes would see a big buildup over here. And the Germans pulled a lot of their military personnel from this part of France and moved them over here so they could defend, for the invasion over here. Well, and then on June the 6th, we attacked here. It was a brutal invasion. We lost tens of thousands of soldiers, but we basically attacked on 5 different beaches: Gold Beach, Juno Beach, Sword Beach, Utah Beach, and Omaha Beach. Now, Utah Beach and Omaha Beach were the toughest because there was a giant cliff that you had. Once you came ashore, you had to climb a cliff. And so we, the United States, these were our 2 beaches that we had to attack. Right? And you can see the British did Sword, the Canadians were Juno, and the British did Gold. All right, but we definitely had the toughest job here. Now, the night before the invasion, the 82nd and 101st Airborne, they flew planes and they parachuted in behind. And so it was a big event, and it was the beginning of the end for the Germans when we were able to come back in and take the northern part of France. All right, and so that's all I got. I kind of went a little long. So like you did the other day, just the underlined words are key. Fill them in and get her done. Have a great day. Bye.